Just get started. Oh my.
Shut up, we'll make sure.
What up, Miss Haygood? Alright, guys. So, as you well know, we had Lord Byron and Thomas Hardy. A little background info on Lord Byron. He was born in 1788, and he lived a short life and died in 1824. His schizophrenic mother and the abandonment from his father drove his writing because he got no love from them as a child, and his writing was utterly obsessed with love. That's all he talked about.
Thomas Hardy was born in 1840 and he died in 1928. He was influenced through Romanticism, like by his opposition towards it, and he never felt at home while at London because he had an acute knowledge of class divisions and his societal inferiority. So that influenced his writing. It's something that he talks about, or an underlayer to all of his poems.
He had his own idea, like Matt said, or like you said, Matt. He had his own idea of what his society should be. So he was very critical of Victorian values. So a lot of his poems are either taking situations and saying what should happen or what should have happened, or talking about situations and saying what's going to happen in the future, but metaphorically.
Mm-hmm. So, I think the comparing and contrasting of their main topics was we came out with fantasy versus reality. Fantasy was represented by Lord Byron and reality by Thomas Hardy. And it started, Lord Byron lives in his imagination in almost all of his poems. He talks about the unattainable and how he can't reach. In When We Two Parted, in the final stanza, he says, "If I should meet after long years, how should I greet thee with silence and tears?" And it shows that Byron continuously lives in a world of what ifs. He constantly talks about a woman who he hasn't seen in years, and he still has emotional effects on her or him. And shoot, I lost my train of thought. And he goes on to imagine a completely fake scenario of them meeting, and it shows how he's stuck in his fantasy world. And then
Oh yeah, my poem's like that too, Dylan. Mine's She Walks in Beauty, and he describes this woman, and obviously no woman's perfect, but in stanza 2 he says, "One shade the more, one way the less, had half impaired the nameless grace." So he's basically saying if anything was different about her, she wouldn't be as beautiful or as perfect as he's describing her. So to him, she's perfect, which is obviously something unattainable. And all of his metaphors just reinforce the fact that she's not real. Yeah.
For Lord Byron's The Eve of Waterloo, he also talks about a fantasy land. In the very last lines, he says, "The earth is covered thick with other clay, which her own clay shall cover, heaped and pent, rider and horse, friend, foe, and one red burial pent blent." He's basically saying that no matter what, friend or foe, everyone's affected by war. It's a useless idea. It's a useless institution, and he's saying that in his perfect utopian society, that war would not exist. But a world like that, where war doesn't exist, that world doesn't exist either. It's too perfect. War is inevitable.
See, in Drummer Hodge by Thomas Hardy, the way they think about war is completely contrasted. He thinks about it as this, how it's a fantasy, and he wants it to not exist, and
he's really anti-war.
Yeah, and Hardy's anti-war, but he understands the reality that war has to be there, but he just thinks it's wrong how they're targeting the middle class, and the middle class is losing all their young kids, and they're not even having a chance to grow.
In my poem, I had the ruin made, and what was that?
Oh, wait, not to interrupt you, but also the young in Drummer Hodge, he talks about, he says, young Hodge, the drummer, never knew, fresh from his Wessex home, the meaning of the broad Carew. And like it's Hardy stating that like kids aren't getting a chance to grow, and like they don't know anything past their home because they're taken from war. And this contrasts with Byron, because Byron's talking about trying to like make everything perfect, while Hardy's talking about real issues that are affecting society.
In the Rune Maid I had, mine also like shows like a contrast with Byron, because like the Rune Maid shows like an actual conversation between two women, and they like talk about like societal views of what these women are doing with their lives in comparison to what they were, which is like a poor working class woman, to becoming now a prostitute. As like, so like in She Walks in Beauty by Byron, he could have like described like a conversation he had with this woman, but since she's not real, he can't do that. But like Hardy's allowed to do that because all of his things are realistic.
Yeah, it's like the same thing in When We Two Parted, how they talked about like how he talks about like
If
this
we did
woman.
meet.
Yeah, but like it's always ifs with Byron, like it's never tangible
It's not
evidence.
like concrete
Yeah.
facts.
Alright, so also when you talk about the comparison of their image, right, their imagery, because they both use imagery, but they do it in a very different way. So in like the way they do it is Hardy uses imagery as like the primary use of description, while Byron uses it as like an ancillary ancillary use. Like he uses it as secondary help. He doesn't use it as like the main factor. Like if you look at it in She Walks in Beauty, like he says she walks in beauty like the night. He like if you and then
So that first one is what establishes like the mysterious aspect of her.
Yeah,
and
and
then he goes on to say, of cloudless climes and starry skies. So like that image furthers the metaphor of that she's like the night and she's some mysterious woman that he doesn't know.
And Byron follows a pattern because all of his imagery is like preceded by either a simile or a metaphor. But in To a Sea Cliff by Thomas Hardy, the imagery there are metaphors, but like the imagery and the metaphors are separate. And it's like in the second stanza, it says, "Near to your crown there once sat down a silent, listless pair, and the sunset ended and the dark descended." And that gives you like the image of the sun like fading into the abyss, and then the darkness overtaking the sky.
And one thing I did notice, just a side note, and She Walks in Beauty, Byron has the majority of his imagery has parallelism within it. So like of cloudless climes and starry skies, and then in stanza 2 he says one shade the more, one ray the less, and then finally in his stanza 3 he goes like so soft, so calm, yet eloquent, and then the smile that wins, the tint that glows. So like all of his follow like the same structure or syntax.
Yeah, like in Thomas Hardy's The Darkling Thrush, in the beginning, he says, "I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre gray and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day." So he's like, the spectre gray is like the main point of that. He's using imagery and word choice to show that the world that the speaker's in is just like a dead one, and spectre gray, it's bleak. Then the word spectre is like, you know, a ghost and stuff. He's trying to like show that the world is a dead one.
And like me and Dylan said, and what Matt's talking about in Hardy's poem, my Hardy poem was The Rune Maid, and his introduction of his two characters that they go into conversation with, he describes them initially as like a wild country girl who had no fair garments, no gay bracelets, or bright feathers. So like all of these things like are an introduction to the characters, as opposed to like Byron, who would have introduced them with like what they're like and then gave concrete evidence with imagery about what they look like.
Also, one of the things that they do similar is they're both very ambiguous about their subjects. Like if you look in just about all the poems we have here, I think actually all of them, like except for The Rune Maid, there's never really a name given to a character.
Yeah,
They
mine
always
the only one.
it's always really vague. They give you a hint.
In drummer Hodge, he does give him a name.
He gives him a nickname, but it's not a real name. It's just like it's a passing.
Like drummer Hodge represents a multitude of people.
Yeah, it's not like
that. Like that subject also leads into their characterization and how like they both use the naming of their characters to show if they represent something more than they're supposed to, or if they're just an actual person.
And the two times that Hardy does use names is in my poem and drummer Hodge, and it reinforces our other fact about how he's always in reality. So like it just in mine he gives the name to Malia, one of the prostitutes, and it just gives like the idea that like you're with them and you're hearing their conversation, or in drummer Hodge like you're with them and you're hearing what they're talking about when they're
he wants to show like that he has a deeper connection with these characters than like he has with other ones, because in mine
because Hardy is on his mind.
this is Darkwing Thrush. Right?
Yeah, thank you. The one with the Darkwing Thrush, like the speaker, he's never given a name. He's supposed to he does it on purpose. Like he leaves him being like this mysterious object because he's not supposed to like symbolize one person. He symbolizes the whole idea. The speaker in the Darkwing Thrush represents this like the old society, the 19th century. He's not trying to be specific in that one.
Yeah, they both do a really good job of like really good idea is like by them not naming their characters, they don't just represent one person; they represent an idea as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even in when the
See, like, cause like in She Walks in Beauty by Byron, he does it. He uses the woman to represent like his perfect. The idea of his perfect woman, and then the Darkwing Thrush.
Because he got married like 3 times, so like he never, and he was always in search for like a love. So like he had this idea. So like the fact that he never really got love, and the fact that he had this perfect idea of love contrasted each other, because like they're opposite, obviously extreme. So like wanting love and having this such strict standards don't really go together.
The fact that he doesn't give her a name just shows like how much of an idea she really is, how much of a fantasy she really is. Because I mean, if she would have had a name, that would have made her real, and the idea of perfect might not have been there anymore.
And even at the end, like he describes her, part of some of his descriptions like go to like her body and like, but then at the end he says, "A heart whose love is innocent, a mind at peace with all below." So like he's saying like he has this like slight lust for her, but she's very innocent in her intentions. So like they don't, even that part don't really go together. So like obviously him being with a woman like this isn't realistic for even him.
And like in the Darkwing Thrush, like he does a really good job of like the character or the subject representing an idea again. Like Darkwing Thrush was published in 1899, so you can kind of tell that it was like the shift in the centuries, like you said in your essay.
Mm-hmm.
And like the man is the 19th century, where it's like gloomy and dark, and then the bird comes out, and the bird represents the 20th century, which is supposed to be full of like new beginnings and like prosperity.
Like a better future.
And then
and Hardy was sort of ahead of his time, because like a lot of the stuff, like the fact that one of his poems is about a prostitute, and Victorian era is very like romantic and not like that, shows the fact like a lot he was criticized for his poems that weren't very traditional. So
we got a minute left. Also in like to go back to the imagery, in To a Sea Cliff, he does a really good job of like his diction's really forceful. Like it's solid stone, dark descended, jutting head. Like the connotation of the words are like it's coming at you, and he's talking about how like his imagery does a really good job of like the ferocity of the ocean on the cliff.
And then his imagery in The Ruined Maid also really helps, because his description of the second girl furthers what Malia is not, and what she potentially used to be before she got into that lifestyle.
See, like And for Lord Byron, like he also uses diction pretty well, and it's really forceful, just like Hardy's there, because like, but harsh or hark, a deep sound strikes the like a rising cow, like a deep sound. He just wants to like show the force of war in it. So they both use diction pretty masterfully.
Alright, him to say good, we're done.
Hit him with the haymaker.
Alright,
Oh.
disregard that, please.
Whoo!